Welcome to the Princeton Biopartners podcast. I'm your host, Dylan, and I'm the co-founder of Princeton Biopartners. We're an award-winning strategy consulting firm servicing the life sciences sector. I'm also joined today by my co-host, Connor. He's an MD and long-serving senior consultant on the Princeton Biopartners team.
Hi, everyone. I'm Connor. I'm a senior consultant for several years here, and I've been specialized mainly in medical affairs and evidence generation engagements. I got my MD from Columbia University, and I studied ecology and evolutionary biology at Princeton. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today we're exploring one of the most important shifts happening in the life sciences industry, how AI is changing the way we commercialize medicines, reach patients, and deliver value. It's no longer a buzzword. It's reshaping how organizations of every size operate, from clinical stage biotechs with lean teams to large global commercial entities with multi-billion-dollar portfolios. Today, we're joined by Jeannie Lloyds, a commercial leader with deep expertise across sales, marketing, and market access. Jeannie, we're so pleased to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan and Connors. I'm glad to be here today. And just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I've been in the industry for just over 28 years. I had the privilege of starting my career at Abbott Laboratories. I was there 13 and a half years, and I really feel like that was the foundation of really being able to learn marketing and sales and access and all the different components that have come into play so much throughout my career. Leaving Abbott Laboratories, I had the opportunity to move over to Allergan and work with them to start their first ever hospital division. We were able to bring life-saving medications to patients in need within the hospital space, and it was an incredibly rewarding time for the 5.5 years that I spent with them. But shifting out of that, I was able to really think about what do I want to do next? And I've had a lot of big pharma experience, which I'm grateful for, but I wanted to take that and really move more towards an entrepreneurial feel and work with smaller organizations where I could make a difference and I could really bring that knowledge and that expertise to help them. And so I transitioned into working with two different organizations and really help them build their entire organizations from the ground up. They didn't exist. And a group of us came in, me being one of them, and we were able to bring not only the company to fruition, but we were able to bring products to fruition, which was an incredibly rewarding experience. My most recent opportunity was working with a European pharmaceutical company based out of Aachen, Germany, Grünenthal, who decided to move into the US marketplace. And we took a product that was completely underperforming for the last 10 years that it had been on the market. And through the work that myself and our team was able to do, we were able to not only bring a much needed product to patients, but we were able to realize success with that with over 4 years of triple digit growth back to back. So really an incredible experience that brings me to this point in my career today.
Brilliant. Well, Jeannie, we're looking forward an incredible amount to jumping into today's discussion, which is how AI is reshaping commercial models in life sciences. We want to really identify what's real, what's next, and where it delivers the greatest impact. So our first question is, of course, we hear AI everywhere. It's such a buzzword, but in commercial pharma, it's more than a buzzword, right? So from your perspective, how is it being used in practical day-to-day ways? And why does that matter for how companies compete and grow?
Yeah, no, I think we all can agree that the commercial model, if you will, the playbook that we used to use for a number of years really has evolved and it doesn't exist in that same format anymore. We used to think about, having a very large share of voice, having a large field presence, having very specific and somewhat static messaging of what we delivered to our different call points. It was almost like a one size fits all philosophy in a lot of the things that we did. And that just doesn't play out anymore. People demand different things, both patients and physicians. When you think about how you're going to define success in today's market, you really have to think about how are you going to ensure that you as an organization, your brand, your content is highly relevant, easily understood. And most importantly, I like to think of the word precision. How are you going to be more precise in the way you go about delivering that information and meeting the needs of the customers? You talked about AI being a buzzword, and I agree. I think, it can be a big, scary word for some people. Some people think they know what it is. Some people don't know what it is. I think for the purposes of today, it's pretty simple in my book. It's about how you take a large amount of data and you apply it in a meaningful way. So we have the ability to get data across our businesses from CRM systems, from patient assistance programs, from claims data. There's so many different data sets that we can compile together. But the meaningful part about that is using machine learning to combine that and identify what are the patterns, what are the insights out of that that are going to allow us to make better decisions in a more faster, efficient way, if you will. Today, when you think about companies using AI, a lot of them are, most of them are using it in some fashion, right? You're seeing some organizations using it now in their demand forecasting, which is great. I think all of us have been part of situations where we never get the forecast right, and it's the elusive unicorn that we're all searching for all the time. And so, if AI can help there, and we're seeing elements of that already, I will take that all day long. We are seeing AI playing a big role in personalizing the content, our messaging, if you will, to not only physicians, but also to patients. We are also seeing the AI process being involved in the patient onboarding process, that patient journey, if you will, and how quickly they're being able to convert to therapy and be able to stay on therapy. And I think one of the greatest things happening that I personally am excited about is how you're starting to see AI technology and capabilities integrated into LMR capabilities. So the legal, medical, regulatory processes, as you know, being a highly regulated in an industry, everything we do has to go through review. It has to go be looked at by legal, medical, and regulatory compliance elements. And so it's a very cumbersome process. You can have a lot of different opinions in that process, and being able to put systems in place that are going to allow for more efficiency, to be done faster, and to have accuracy of the data being validated consistently over time. That's really an exciting area that I think we're going to see a lot more happening with it. At the end of the day, AI is here. It's what we are doing. It is part of the not only the commercial model, but really across the entire organization within biopharma. And I believe it is going to be the foundation of how we move forward, engaging and supporting and truly interacting with our customers.
That's really insightful, Jeannie. Look, can you think of a paradigm shift going back in your career that comes even close to AI, or do you feel like this is just kind of another, just a massive step change in the way that we operate?
I think it would still be a data shift that I would parallel it to. I mean, I think we have gotten the ability to get more data streams, if you will, available to us. It used to be times where we couldn't even get patient level data from, de-identified, of course, through claims. The ability to take all of that, and once you started getting it, became a really powerful tool for us to start making better decisions. But in the end, the problem still existed, is that we ended up getting vast amounts of data streams. We were so excited that all of a sudden we could get data from this specialty pharmacy or from, this data entity or data aggregator. But then you have all this data, and it's how do you put it together and use it in a meaningful way that I believe was missing until now, when we have the technology that's allowing us to do that.
And do you feel like the tech is leading to just efficiency gains in what manual labor is able to do, or is it leading to new methods of analysis that were previously, not possible?
Yeah, no, it definitely goes way beyond efficiency. It's the decision making that I think becomes out of that is really the sweet spot, so to speak. Yes, the AI data can help us be more effective in, we talked about targeting, for example, and being able to get to the right physicians with the right message at the right time, so to speak. But it's really being able to take this and meet the needs of the ever-changing world, and that would be our customers. If you think about it, for example, with direct-to-patient engagement, right? That has been a cornerstone of what we've done for a number of years now. It's not new, but I think expectations are changing on that front, right? I think patients are now, and physicians are now expecting it to be a much simpler process, a much more efficient and faster process, if you will. And I think AI is the tools that are going to allow us to do that. To give an example of that would be our patient hubs, right? Our patient access hubs and support hubs. We've always had those. They've been a vital part of what we've done. However, a lot of it has been manual or with, more, typical type of automated tools. AI-enabled hubs are now being able to, again, take a lot of different data and really streamline that to not only make the process go faster and more efficient, getting through the benefits verification process, the prior authorization process in a more efficient way, but it's actually going to the next level where it's allowing us to start anticipating needs at scale. By having all of this different data coming in, we can identify the patterns of when a patient is going to be at risk to not fill their therapy or stay on therapy, when insurance changes now are going to make the out-of-pocket costs so much higher that a patient likely is not going to stay on therapy. Those are the nuances that AI can bring from anticipating needs that are going to allow us to truly make a difference, I think, in a more proactive way than we necessarily have been able to do.
Very interesting, Jeannie. And obviously, you can relate to this being part of the AbbVie and Allergan team. When you're oftentimes part of these big multinationals, you can sometimes be somewhat distanced from the patient and the patient's actual friction points when it comes to that journey, right? As you mentioned, benefits verifications. Can you just kind of help to kind of elucidate for the listeners what some of those friction points are from the patient side when they're trying to get approved for a therapy or go through some of these steps? What does that look like? And again, let's bring it back to how AI is leading to some effectiveness there.
Yeah, well, I think, if you put yourselves in the shoes of patients, right? Many of them, especially if you're thinking about older patient population, right? They're on multiple medications. They have multiple needs that they're trying to manage and probably a limited income to do that with, right? And so, a physician writes a prescription for a product. Guess what? That product is only fulfilled through a specialty pharmacy that the manufacturer has decided to contract with, something that that patient has never ever heard of. So what happens is that that prescription will get sent to a hub that the manufacturer has selected. That hub will likely do a benefit verification, determine if it's approved, notify the physician if it is. The patient gets lost really quickly in this whole process, right? Because now you have nobody letting the patient know what's going on. The physician likely got a response saying it's approved and it's going to be sent to XYZ pharmacy for fulfillment, but that oftentimes never reaches the patient. What happens is XYZ pharmacy starts leaving messages for that patient on their cell phone. And they're like, who the heck is calling me? And I don't know who
Yeah.
this is. And they don't remember the name of the medication even when they do talk to them. So they're not even sure it's what they were supposed to have. And so those are just small examples. But again, AI capabilities are really going to streamline this a lot more. It's going to be able to make that connectivity piece much more connected, if you will. And so data points are not getting lost consistently. And I think the manufacturers that are working with AI-enabled hubs, coupling that with partnerships with pharmacies and being able to really make that into a cohesive, coordinated experience for the patient with very proactive outreach happening from the get-go from the entities that they're going to stay in contact with, which is often not the physician's office, is really critical as we move forward to streamline that experience.
In my experience in the clinic, this is spot on. I think that the current times where I see a patient flare or fall off medication is usually not due to their desire to stop that medication. It's due to being lost in the bureaucracy of often specialty pharmacies and kind of these designer medications and everything that she just described that it takes to facilitate that process. You hopefully have a health system that's invested in a pharmacy back-end team that is going to help with some of that administrative process. But what AI potentially offers us is the ability to have that almost personal assistant through a really complex mire of medical forms and phone calls and dates to keep up with. And that personal assistance is available to every patient, no matter if they're at a health system that decided to invest in that or not. And I think that we talk a lot about the ethics of AI, and oftentimes in national conversations, it's in a negative sense. But here in healthcare, AI not only has a benefit, obviously, to pharmaceutical companies, but a huge benefit to patients in this capacity, which is giving them the tools they need to access the drugs that are going to keep them healthy. And I just see it time and time again how hard it is to navigate, and AI is a perfect tool to help bridge that gap.
No, I think you're right, Connor. And before we jump over to ethics, one comment I want to make about that is I think you're going to be able to do that with much fewer resources because today that process is incredibly manual, right? You're hiring multiple nurse educators, you're hiring multiple case managers. And again, I think every commercial leader out there knows that we're being asked to do more with less, right? Whether it be resources or investment. And so AI is going to be able to be that tool that's going to help facilitate that in meeting the needs of the organization, but most importantly, making it more streamlined for the patient. I think the other exciting component that we're starting to see happen quite a bit is companies really heightening that direct to patient engagement directly. And some people may not like that, but I think you see that pretty predominantly with GLPs, for example, right? You see how they are putting telehealth platforms now on their websites. They're allowing patients to bypass necessarily going to see their regular physician, but still being able to get appropriate medical guidance and direction from qualified physicians. And then, if appropriate, that's being directly linked into fulfillment of that product for the patient, affordability options on how they're going to be able to pay for it, as well as that ongoing support. So manufacturers are being able to put it into a seamless customer journey, all with AI support and able to make that happen. And I think it's really interesting as we see, and I bet we'll see more and more of that happening as we move forward.
As an example, access has improved tremendously at my institution from programs like that. Because if I want to get a patient a GLP-1 that I, as a dermatologist, have an indication for, I would need to refer them first to endocrinology. They'd have to go to that appointment, then be approved by another physician to get that. Whereas through a direct to patient model, they can have that done, a week after I say, hey, maybe this is a good idea for you to go on this. And so rather than gate this behind a health system, as long as there's a physician saying this is okay, these direct to patient models really improve access and ultimately outcomes.
Yeah,
And Connor, maybe just a quick question for you on the back of that. Do you see a kind of a generational discrepancy between how, millennial physicians are engaging with and kind of entrusting direct patient models as opposed to, healthcare professionals that have been a bit more tenured?
I do. As specifically speaking to the dermatology space, there's a lot of online telehealth platforms that give patients access to compounded medications that they may not be able to directly access through insurance. And younger physicians often will refer patients to those platforms or engage with those platforms themselves. But I noticed that the older generation is not as aware of some of those options. And so I think improving knowledge about these platforms just gives physicians more tools to help their patients get the medications that they need. Ultimately, when someone comes to me, I'm just trying to connect them to the drug that's going to help them or the therapy that's going to help them. And whether that's in a direct to patient platform or whether it's through the standard prescribing system, it doesn't matter to me. And I think I would echo most of the feelings of my current colleagues. So I think that as these direct to patient platforms proliferate, I think there is going to be a need to improve the education around their existence. And so any company that's listening, I think if you're going to design one of these platforms, make sure it's tied to a really good medical affairs team that's getting this out to healthcare professionals and teaching them how to recommend it to their patients. Because while some patients are going to find that on their own and go through the telehealth platform on their own, there's a huge opportunity for actual inpatient visits that then a physician refers them to that platform to get a drug that it might be harder to get, just by the standard insurance process.
Absolutely, Connor. I think that's paramount, working with medical affairs teams to ensure that's a seamless experience for all parties involved. Speaking about awareness and education, Jeannie, I want to touch on marketing actually, and how you have seen AI lead to shifts in effectiveness of marketing.
Well, I think this is one of the areas that is getting the biggest shift given what's going on in the industry right now. Traditionally, you think about marketing, your goal is to get your brand, your content, out there, and that you're measuring and monitoring, traditional KPIs, such as page visits and click-through rates and, traffic to your website. And while all of that, is important, it's not enough anymore. Let's just think about it. In up until, whenever, recently, I'll say, a patient would type something into Google or a person would type something into Google and, you would want to make sure that you have positioned and tagged your content appropriately so that it's going to pop up. Well, that circumstance has changed now. Typically, what happens today is a patient is going to go to one of the AI platforms, ChatGPT, Grok, something of that sort, and they're going to ask a question. They're going to say, I'm having these symptoms. What do you think is happening, and what would be the best medications for me to take? Are there any new therapies to treat XYZ condition? And so it's gone from being a search optimization world to an answer optimization world. Because if you do not have the right content being tagged appropriately to show up, and your product is not showing up in those automated AI responses, if you will, you're already behind the eight ball. Because what happens is the patient then will continue to ask questions. They then take that information directly into their physicians and they say, I want this product. This is what I have, and this is what I think I should, be given. And you're already lost completely in that conversation and or only reliant potentially on the physician, maybe wanting to battle with that patient, on there's a better option. And I'm not sure why it didn't show up, but this is what I think. So it's a really interesting way. And again, going back to the measurement piece, I think that's going to be really critical for marketers and for the agencies that they partner with. It is going to be going much more down the path of not necessarily the traditional KPIs, but how many AI platforms are you showing up on? What is the percentage of share of voice are you getting in the responses that are being generated? And what's the accuracy of the data that is being given? That's a whole new component that we are going to have governance around to really make sure what's being generated is what we want to be having generated.
Very helpful, Judy. And thinking about you're obviously a commercial leader. How do you think about upskilling your marketing team around AI and its use? I mean, is this something where you are incorporating things into KPIs, or is it more about just guiding them towards working with the right vendors and agencies?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where the starting place is. I think that you are seeing certain agencies really jump out ahead versus other agencies, and they're able, as part of their partnership with you, explain how they're going to use AI, how you should be using AI, and what's different today versus how they would have been doing it previously. I think that's a non-starter if you have an agency that isn't proactively coming to you that you currently are working with, and or if you're going to source for a new one, that has to be the conversation, right? Because you have to get really confident that that agency not only is talking the talk, but they actually are doing it, right? So I think that's really critical. I think that, yes, there are always going to be other opportunities and learnings. I think we talk a lot about professional development for our teams, and especially in smaller organizations, that can get lost really easily because you're running, oftentimes you're running around like crazy. You're wearing 4 or 5 different hats, if you will, because you have limited people, limited resources. But this is one area, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in compliance, whether you're in regulatory, it doesn't matter at this point. You have got to understand how AI is used effectively, how it shouldn't be used, and what are the pitfalls and things you should be watching out for. And so I think it really starts with, yes, finding the right partners to do it, but I think there's an onus and an accountability on us as leaders within an organization to be putting developmental programs behind understanding how AI is going to become a business driver for us moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think that, having that shared common language within the organization around AI and its use cases is absolutely paramount. On the vendor side, do you see a lot of mystification at times or black box methodologies in how AI is used? And how do you kind of circumnavigate that? I mean, obviously you mentioned kind of professional development within your internal teams. Is there anything else that, you use as kind of a litmus test as to what's real versus what might just be a bit of a hype?
Yeah, well, the example that comes to mind is we recently worked with a vendor that, pitched to us to redo our call planning process, through their proprietary AI-backed software that has 100 different components that it'll identify physicians that are more likely to adopt based on certain characteristics and things of that sort. And we went in circles, I'll be really honest with you, because, and maybe this was on me and I have to, figure out a way to get more open-minded about how we're moving forward. But I really wanted to understand kind of, so to speak, your black box, if you will, that they had. They kept saying, well, it's proprietary. And I said, well, it can't be proprietary in the sense that I can't understand it, right? I have to believe that what you're doing makes sense. And we really went round and round to the point that we ended up switching vendors because we couldn't get to a place where everyone was feeling comfortable. At some places, I would get comfortable and say, okay, I can get behind what they're saying there. But then somebody else on the team would be like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense, right? I've got to see proof of that. And ultimately, everything we do is in a collaborative effort, right? We have to have the team backing behind the actions and the things that we're putting out there so that our field teams feel confident in what they're getting. And so I think that it is going to be an interesting dynamic to really see how different vendors manage through what they deem proprietary to them and makes them special as it comes to the AI software that they're building, coding, and incorporating into their systems, but also getting that credibility and that confidence level that's needed to want a manufacturer to trust our business to them.
And Ginny, were the outcomes that this said vendor was producing on the core plan what you had expected, or was the issue just around like how they were communicating what they were doing, or did you feel like you were getting drastically different
Well,
outcomes?
therein lies the problem because they weren't offering like a real-time ongoing data feed of new inputs. So we were still back to the what I would say is starting to become antiquated, this concept of creating a one-time static list, trying it for a quarter or two, with field, representatives doing it and then feeding back to us, is this an accurate list or not? So I think in that case, that's where, some of the problem lies. Now you are seeing models shift from what I've been, hearing about quite a bit. In fact, there was a recent smaller oncology company that really, has been very public about how they have taken predictive analytics and but kept it in a real-time basis where they have ongoing refresh data coming in weekly to their target call list for their field teams. It's looking at referral patterns, the latest claim data and diagnosis data that's coming in, and it's constantly kind of updating those lists. They now are citing that they believe it's leading to their success, right? And the outcomes that they're having with their new product launch. I could see plenty of people on the other side saying, well, that's just going to confuse the field. You're now going to have people that are getting constantly new lists and they're going to be changing direction all the time. So I think the balance is going to be how do we figure that part out? It sounds great in theory, but now you have 100 people in the field that have to execute on that really great sounding theory, and they need to do it in a really thoughtful way. And so there needs to be some balance that I still think that we have to figure out. But I think the idea of having a one-time static list is not going to be the answer anymore.
And it's interesting because I actually just Googled this one AI company. I think they're called Builder.ai. And essentially, they had a really frothy narrative, right? Like game-changing AI outcomes. Turned out they just hired like loads of engineers in India that were just producing the work that they said the AI was producing. So a bit funny there. But also, Jeannie, that thinking about how AI is leading to a bit of job displacement, which I think, we're seeing. Amazon today just laid off 12,000 employees, right? You mentioned the sales rep there. Do you feel like the sales rep is actually probably one of the most secure positions because of that human connection? And that, beyond sales rep, MSLs, anybody that has that human connection with key stakeholders, is that here to stay, or do you feel like AI is also going to, eventually replace that function as well?
It's an interesting question. I know it's the big fear out there that everybody has, right? And I think we would be naive to not think that there are going to be places where, AI assisted processes and systems are going to be more efficient, right? And I think that that's okay because other things come out of that. Somebody still has to manage the oversight of that, right? So it might just be a shift in skill sets that are going to be needed, so to speak. But I don't truly believe we're going to see this widespread replacement. I could be wrong, but to your question specifically with our field teams, whether it be our sales representatives or our medical affairs teams, for example, or even our access teams, I think we're a long way off, if ever, from that being displaced. I think that we can make it much more efficient than it is. Like, you're seeing tools being put into the CRM systems now with next best action recommendations and really guiding those field teams in real time about who to see and what to say and how to follow up, that's going to be much more customized to that physician. But that human connection, relationships still matter, right? Selling is still a combination of being an art and a science, right? And people make a big difference in those connections. And I mean, Connor would probably be able to give his insight from the other side. But I do believe that the service that we bring, if we're doing so in a meaningful way, making it relevant, thoughtful, and being, very conscious of the time that we're giving to and asking from our providers, I really still believe that component is critical in the equation.
I can't imagine those relationships going away in the way that they currently exist because they're just so vital in our clinic that we have someone physically we can interact with and someone who can, if there's an issue, come to see us and talk with us and work with us in the way that we work with patients. I really think that that is, like she said, probably AI will just support that and make these sales easier, but not necessarily replace the human element. I did want to ask specifically on the healthcare provider aspect of marketing. You mentioned that there's a focus on positioning certain therapies within the patient-centered AI like ChatGPT, but I can speak from the clinical experience, which is that physician-oriented AI, like open evidence being the big one, is everywhere. And I think a lot of doctors don't want to admit this, but it is the biggest clinical decision support tool, watershed moment I think I've seen in my entire time in medicine. Everyone has it on their phone. When there's a tough case or just something that you want to double check, you go to open evidence. Or potentially Perplexity. How do you see teams aligning around that in terms of positioning? Do you
Mhm.
see the pharmaceutical industry kind of identifying how important that's becoming to physicians? Or is that something that I'm just noticing now?
No, I think you're seeing more and more reports of it, right? And the percentage of physicians that are, now supposedly using that as part of their treatment decision making. And why wouldn't they? I mean, again, if we know patients are coming in with all this data, you have to stay informed and up to date on that as well, right? And so, yeah, I didn't mean to leave them out. It goes hand in hand exactly at what we're doing to really ensure that we're reaching the content in a meaningful way and to the patients. The same thing has to be happening on the physician platforms as well. And I would say even more so to some extent. But I think that this is where we can really partner with a lot of physicians and build that partnership and help them or have them help us to really guide us on what do you want to see there? How can we be the most effective partner there? I think that there's a balance, with anything. As a physician, your clinical judgment always has to supersede everything else. You're the one that has the knowledge, is physically, live there with the patient and has to make those decisions. But how can we augment and help support you in that decision-making process in a meaningful way? And so I think a lot more work needs to be done there. But again, that goes hand in hand. We have our patient agencies, we have our HCP agencies that we work with, and both of them have to be coming to the table with the tools that we need to be really thinking about and then putting into play, if you will. And that's a big piece of it.
That's super valuable. And Connor, kind of question for you, obviously on, from my side, I don't know if you can relate, but I feel like there's brand loyalty attached to particular LLMs, right? Like I'm a loyalist of ChatGPT. I've got friends who always go to Perplexity. Connor, do you see the same kind of behaviors playing out on the clinical side? I mean, you mentioned open evidence, there's others, Doximity and so forth. Like, is there this brand loyalty building amongst physicians, and how do you think that's being built?
So it's being built by leveraging other brands that physicians already trusted. So the reason open evidence is so popular is they made this partnership with the New England Journal of Medicine, which is to most physicians the Bible of medicine in the sense of it being the most, well peer-reviewed, highest impact studies. And Open Evidence made a partnership with a variety of other journals that were high impact factor. And so that's why so many physicians immediately forked to using that relatively, I would say primarily as the current first step in looking something up. And it was very quickly designed to be physician and healthcare provider specific in terms of how it also answered the questions, which is an issue sometimes in ChatGPT and other more generalized platforms, which is that they may not give you a case breakdown or they may not give you kind of a deep dive consult related answer in the way that you want one in medicine. I'm seeing that brand loyalty built very fiercely, at least for open evidence. I honestly wonder right now if it's going to be possible to supplant that or if those hooks are already in because again they made those partnerships with entities that already had a very, very storied history in medicine. I think if a team were to try to come out with something different, they would have to leverage those existing reputational paradigms and create something in a similar vein. I think that there's still opportunities for AI that specific to physicians that leverage more patient experience. As a physician in dermatology, there's a lot of data that it doesn't exist in the formal scientific literature, a lot of patient experiences with cosmetic products or products that don't have necessarily an FDA label that I'd like to know about, but I can't access through Google Scholar or through the New England Journal. So having an AI that could give me patient experiences from forums or from discussion groups or something like that, so I could better triage a complication someone's having to a particular cosmeceutical, that could be really helpful. And I think other AI tools like that will eventually develop around quality of life. But currently, when it comes to evidence, open evidence is taking the cake when it comes to scientific, journal sourcing.
Yeah.
Sounds like there could be a business there, Connor, that you developed.
Okay.
Maybe, maybe.
But you do bring up a really good point, right? Because think about it again. If you're focusing only on one side of the equation, what might be showing up in some of these more, general public AI platforms may be very different than what you're saying about our brand, in these more medically, directed ones. And so how we are monitoring that, it goes back to those KPIs I talked about. You really have to really rethink your landscape of how you are monitoring what is happening and how successful it is to really make sure, is that matching? Is it not? And if so, then what do you do about that, right? It's a whole new way of thinking. And I think that, again, the companies that are figuring this out and are embracing it as part of their foundation as like a true business driver for how we move forward, I think are the ones that are going to have the competitive edge moving forward.
So, Gina, that's a really powerful perspective. And to wrap up, would love to end on a forward-looking note. As AI continues to evolve, what excites you the most about its future in pharma? And what should commercial leaders be doing now to prepare for what's next?
Yeah, well, I'm somebody that loves change. I like moving fast. So I'm excited about everything and how quickly it's transforming. Now, that can be frustrating if you're in an organization that doesn't move fast. So I get that. So I think it's really a calling, if you will, for all organizations, regardless of size, to start being a lot more open-minded and flexible and agile in keeping up with the customer's needs, whether it be our patients, whether it be our providers and or the payers that we need to have meaningful relationships with. I think the potential, if we get this right, really is huge for our industry and most importantly, for the people that benefit from what we do.
Mm.
Everybody likes to think that pharmaceuticals and biopharma companies are all about making money. At the end of the day, there are core values that we have that work in this industry. It's about putting the patient at the center of everything we do. How do we improve their lives, their quality of life? It's about doing it in the right way, with high integrity and with right and accurate data, so to speak. And it's about really being accountable for what we do and what we say and making sure that it mirrors who we want to be thought of within the industry. And I think when you couple the power that AI is going to allow us to have by taking such valuable data and compiling that in a way to make us smarter and more efficient and asking better questions of ourselves and others. You couple that with the values that I believe we all are rooted in. I think it's a powerful combination that ultimately is going to allow our industry to stay ahead of the crazy curve that's happening of technology and the winds and the which they're blowing. And again, I truly believe at the end of the day, it's going to allow us to make a difference, not only from an organizational standpoint and deliver performance objectives and things of that sort, but most importantly, it's going to help us meet the needs of our patients and of the customers.
Very well said, Jeannie. And of course, the patient outcome is everything. It's why we do what we do. Thank you, Jeannie, for such an insightful and grounded discussion. You've taken AI evidently from concept to reality, and the use cases within the teams that you built is clearly having value. The takeaway is clear. AI isn't about replacing people, it's about enabling smarter, faster, and more connected decisions across every part of the business. Leaders who embrace that responsibly and with purpose will reshape the future of commercial pharma. Jeannie, thanks so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed the discussion, and I hope
Yeah,
you enjoy the rest of your day.
it was my pleasure. Thank you both.